Hi, good morning. My name is Bazemo. As I work with Africa Faith and Justice Network as policy analyst. By the way, I am a Roman Catholic priest. So I'm going to present today a theme on religion, faith, and violence from an African perspective. As you know, Africa is a very big continent of more than 50 countries, over 1 billion people. So what I'm going to say might not capture the bigger picture of the continent. So I'm going to scan some of the issues of violence found on the continent and to propose ways of solving this problem. So this is quickly my plan from the introduction to the concluding remarks. From the extensive international media coverage of religious-based violence on the continent, most people can now agree that religion is one of the major sources of violence in Africa. How to fix it has become a favorite topic of considerable interest to scholars, policymakers, and people of all walks of life, because violence does affect our lives, our families, and also the global community. So as a way of highlighting the global struggle for violence prevention, this presentation will attempt to explore the complex phenomenon of violence in Africa, of which some are grounded, triggered, and fueled by religious and cultural beliefs. The analysis draws from an existing body of scholarly research, and most importantly, from my own experience of engaging different constituencies in various regions on the continent, home to a very rich cultural and religious experiences. So setting the stage, because Africa is very big, how to approach the whole issue of violence. We can amply state that Africa has a vibrant religious heritage. Life in Africa, everything in Africa has a religious connotation. And we could even say that the African soul is intrinsically religious. But unfortunately, we do not have a full-blown and systematic body of scholarly studies about the issue of religion and violence. We find some studies done in one region, but as a continent, we don't have many researchers done in that field. So one study that I found was done by David Barrett and some of his colleagues, 4 of his colleagues, about religion in Africa. And from their study, we are able to find 3 major religious, I would say, faith traditions in sub-Saharan Africa. The northern being predominantly Muslim. The African religion from African traditions, so we call African tradition religions that are credited with 12%. We have Christianity, 45%, and Islam, 40%. But an important footnote, all these religions thrive within an African socio-cultural setting. So the way they are going to live their faith will depend very much from an African setting and perspective. So as a way of analyzing the many religious experiences we find on the continent, and I told you earlier that we don't have full-blown studies about religion. How do we go about that? First, we draw insights from cultural anthropology, from cosmology, theology, and sociology. When we face any religion, how do we analyze it? The first thing is to ask yourself, what is their understanding of the human person? What is the understanding of the role of the human person within the wider cosmos? What is the understanding of human society? The distribution of social roles, hierarchy, economy, ownership, patterns of learned behavior. What are their core values. What are the religious values? What about the whole issue of governance? Theocracy, democracy? Which forms of governance is or are reinforced by their beliefs? And one thing that we have also to pay attention to is the whole thing of religion and culture. There is a thin, I would say, layer between religion and culture. With that, we could give ourselves a working definition of violence. Anything that causes injury, kills, inflicts pain physically or psychologically in the name of any given supreme being, religious belief, idea of God, could be construed as religious violence. A research that was done by Pew Research Religion and Public Life Project, the results were released in January 2014, this year, on levels of social hostility involving religion. The findings show that the share of countries with a high or very high level of social hostilities involving religion reached a 6-year peak in 2012. The sharpest increase being in the Middle East and North Africa. We know why, because of the Arab Spring. And the consequences we can draw from this study is that religious violence has become now a public health concern because of its harmful consequences like depression and post-traumatic stress. So from there, we can try to classify the different forms of religious violence from an African perspective. We have institutional violence, violence that is embedded in social and religious structures. Symbolic violence, that is the forceful imposition of one's religious beliefs on others. Or political religious violence, which is a religiously motivated violence for a political purpose. And we could see that violence can affect us at different levels. Personal level, interpersonal, ethnic level, religious level, and at ecological level. So at a personal level, religious beliefs have been the cause of inhumane actions by innumerable believers across Africa. Self-inflicted suffering, self-mutilation, suicide, some drink poison, the act of hanging oneself, honor killing to avoid systematic stigmatization so as to respond to cultural or religious expectation, where failure, accusatory blame are not tolerated within the society. We have mass murder, suicide cults associated with different beliefs. A case in point is around the third millennium, there was a movement in Uganda called the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God in Uganda, in which around 700 people perish. At the personal level, we have this religious belief that continued to enforce the patriarchal dominance of men over women. Female genital mutilation, rape with its consequences of HIV/AIDS, psychological trauma, gender inequality, sexual harassment, forced marriages of teenagers, domestic and gender violence, all that's predominantly perpetrated against women. Child soldier, child labor. And for the case of child soldier, we have in the eastern part of Congo, the Mai community. It's believed that if you wear the juju, the amulets, you become bulletproof. If they shoot on you, you will not die. So as a result of that, many people died in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have also modern-day slavery still found in Mauritania, the Gambia, human trafficking, and cultural taboos of exclusion. We have witchcraft, of which, if you are accused, especially women, you are either killed or secluded. We have the practice of human sacrifices, ritual killings for spiritual favors, from Nigeria all the way to South Africa. At the interethnic level, we have the we and the they frame of mind, which reinforces the whole ethnic prejudice, the myth, and the complex of ethnic superiority. which negatively fuel the inimical and impulsive proclivity to genocidal tendencies of communities across the continent. We have a lot of xenophobia that is being felt in many communities. We have the sad story that all of us know about, the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, in which 800,000 Tutsi and moderate Hutus perished. Or in Central African Republic, ethnic cleansing and sectarian killings, Christians versus Muslims. And we know over 2,000 people died. At the interreligious level, we have religious prejudice. We have many killings happening in Egypt, or the widely covered 2013 Al-Shabaab attacks in a Nairobi mall, which was very much covered by the media. We have the Lord's Resistance Army of Joseph Kony in northern Uganda. We have the Boko Haram of Mohammed Yusuf in northern Nigeria. And we all know about this hashtag, Bring Back Our Girls, that was launched by Michelle Obama. Or Akim in northern and West African Sahel belt. Al-Shabaab, Al-Muaydin in the East and Horn of Africa. And many other cases that are found around the continent. At the ecological level, this may be one of the subtle and yet damaging form of violence with far-reaching consequences for the present and future generations, namely the destruction of our environment. As an African proverb has it, the land does not belong to us. We borrow it from our children. It's very important. So we have to take care of what does not belong to us. And from a Catholic perspective, we have one term that we use a lot, the preservation of the common good. This is something that is good for all of us, and we should try as much as possible to preserve it. Or the care for ecological integrity, a concept that is very dear to the Earth Charter Initiative. This picture that you see is to create awareness. It's a prayer service for ecological integrity in front of the statue of Buddha in Kenya by leaders of the Maasai community and Buddha priests to try to raise the awareness of integrity that we need to have vis-a-vis the environment. With that caveat in mind, what should we do to prevent violence? Quoting from the preamble to the constitutive document of UNESCO, which says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And here I draw from my own experience of dealing with violence, of working towards reconciliation between Muslims and Catholics in Zanzibar, in Kenya, in Tanzania, and partly in Uganda. The first thing I do when I work with the youth is to try to transform their minds and hearts, to deconstruct the whole concept of prejudice for a real change of mind. Through peace education, therapy, and conflict resolution skills. As I was working also with a think tank at the level of the government, we try to push them to use international instruments that give them power to be able to enforce law and order. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination based on religion or belief. Now, as communities working towards change, what I propose is that to engage a constructive dialogue of life between followers and leaders of various faith traditions, to be able to foster social cohesion and religious coexistence for a long-term goal of building and constructing integrated and pluralist societies in Africa. My concluding remarks, I want you just to see this big picture. It is a success story that is being unfolded in Central African Republic. It is an example of interreligious dialogue and religious coexistence. It is about Archbishop Jordan Zampalaiga, Imam Omar Kobine Layama, and Reverend Nicholas Gerikoyame Mbangu, who decided to team up together to bring peace and reconciliation to their country torn apart by ethnic and religious violence. I was particularly privileged to be with them and to work closely with them towards bringing this concept, share their story that it is possible to agree. We might differ in our way of looking at God, but can still be brothers and sisters. Their active involvement helped broker peace agreements and a roadmap for the organization of peaceful and possibly credible democratic elections in their country. May their example be emulated all around Africa and maybe beyond the confines of the continent. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Bartholomew. And now we will go ahead and listen to Andres Villaveses from the World Bank, who will speak to us about lethal violence in Latin America. Welcome, Andres.
Thank you.